Hey folks, welcome to World Paints Gaming 10. Today we'll be covering the tutorial for the game The King is Dead, 2nd edition, designed by Pierre Sylvester and published by Osprey Games. The King is Dead is designed for 2 to 4 players, and it is expected to be played in roughly 30 to 45 minutes. It is a game of highly tactical area control and hand management where the king of the land has died and the Scottish, Welsh and the English factions are vying for control of the British Isles, with France off on the corner here trying to basically do their own thing and try to mess things up a little bit for the British. At the end of the game, one of the 3 factions might be crowned the victor, and then whoever has the most control or the most influence over that faction is the winner in the game. The game can also end with France basically doing an invasion where they've sort of like come in and they've taken control of the British Isles for themselves. So let's quickly go into the setup for the game, and then we'll talk about how the turn structure works and how things are slightly different for different play accounts. Over here, we have the game set up for a 3-player game. We'll go through the teach and the setup, assuming a 3-player setup. There is one very minor difference for a 2-player setup. I'll call that out when we get to that in between this particular section of the video itself. And then we'll come back at the very end and talk about how the 4-player setup works, because it's a team setup for 4 players and it works a little bit differently compared to the other play counts. So to start off, you will set out the game board in the center right over here, like so. Next up, you will take the 3 black markers for the French and put them over on the side where you have the map of France showing on the corner right there. Next up, you will notice that on the side of the board, there are numbers marked 1 to 4 over here and then 5 to 8 on this side. You will take these location cards, give them a random shuffle, and then put out 1 right next to each one of the spaces. So we have 4 cards here going 1 to 4, and then another 4 going 5 to 8 on that side. There are only 8 location cards in the game, so those are all going to be used up right over there. Next up, you will give each player a negotiation disc, which is one of these white cylinders right over here. The game comes with a whole bunch of different cubes in there. So there are going to be cubes for 3 different colors: yellow for the English, red for the Welsh, and blue for the Scottish. And they will also correspond to the same colored cylinders for themselves as well. For now, take all the different cubes that come in the game, put them in the game bag, as it were. Then just take out 2 blue cubes, put them on Murray, which is this location right over there at the very top. Take 2 red cubes, put them on Gwynedd on the side over here, and then take yellow cubes and put them on Essex right over there. These are going to be sort of like the starting strongholds for the 3 different factions in the game. Next, once you have the remaining cubes in the bags themselves, give it a shuffle, then draw out any 2 cubes randomly, give it to each of the players around the table, then take 2 cubes, put it on Gwynedd randomly, 2 more cubes for Essex, and then 2 more cubes for Murray. So that way, those 3 locations now have 4 cubes each. Then each of the other locations will be seeded with 4 cubes, again randomly drawn as well. So these will definitely have at least 2 representatives of their own respective factions, but for these others in the middle, they can be randomly distributed and they can be any combination whatsoever. Take the remaining cubes and put them up on the supply section right over there. You will take all the different control markers, which are the cylinders in these different colors for the corresponding factions. So again, yellow is for English, red is for Welsh, and blue is for Scottish. And then put them all up right over there, like so. And with that, you're done with the setup of the game board itself. Players have their starting cubes that they will start off with. They have the negotiation disc. One of the last things you will now do is give each player their starting hand. For the purposes of this teach, we will go through the base game, which comes with a standard set of 8 cards. I'll quickly call out the advanced rules at the very end of the game, because the only thing you will do in there is swap out some of the cards for some of the others. So we'll have a look at that at the very end. But generally, the main version of the game will use 8 cards, which are going to be these specific 8 cards in question. So the rule book basically lays them out, but if you want to use this teach as the basis for it, take out the English, Welsh, and Scottish support cards, give 1 to each player. Take out the assemble cards, give 2 to each player. Maneuver card, give 1 to each player. Outmaneuver, 1 to each player. And then negotiate, 1 to each player. And with that, everybody has the starting set of hands that they need to start the game off with. And with that, we're off to the races and we're about to get started. Oh, before I forget, this card will be laid out to the side over here. So this is a double-sided card. One side will show the coronation, the other side will show the invasion. Don't worry about what this card does for now. We'll just put it to the side and we'll come back to this when we talk about the endgame condition or triggers. So what are you looking to do on your turn? In this game, as I'd mentioned, the English, Welsh, and Scottish are vying for control of the British Isles over here. On your turn, what you basically want to do is you want to gain influence represented by these cubes for the different factions, with the intent of having the most cubes of the faction that you think will end up controlling the British Isles by the end of the game. So basically the way that you will do this is on your turn, you will either take an action or you will pass. It's as simple as that. And taking an action basically means you're playing a card down, taking the effect of the associated card to the best of your ability. There might be some instances where you can only take part of the benefit, but not the full benefit. In those cases, you will do the maximum that you can with the card in question. And then once you're done with the action, you can pick up any one of the available cubes on the game board at that point in time and bring it to your court. So this is representing, area represents your court. Once you play down a card, you could potentially take a cube like so and put it on your court like that. So let's see how some of these actions might work and how this game basically continues. So if you're playing something like the English support, this card tells you that you will, for any location that is controlled by the English, and control for any faction is represented by a cylinder on the board. So as of right now, as you can see, there are no cylinders at the start of the game on the game board, but over the course of the game, some of these control markers would come out. So as an example, let's say Lancaster is controlled by the English. So what this tells you is that for location or any location that is controlled by the English, you can put down 2 markers adjacent to that, and they must be on the same location. So this is controlled by the English. You could potentially pick up 2 from the supply here, and the effect of the cards must always come from the supply right over there. And you can put down 2 either on this location or this location or this, because they're all adjacent to this control marker right over there. So that's basically how the support cards would work. And there are 3 support cards in the game, the English, Welsh, and the Scottish, and they work the same way. If you're playing this card at the very start of the game where nobody has any control markers on the game board, each faction is assumed to control their respective starting locations. So the English by default are assumed to control Essex, Welsh are assumed to control Gwynedd, and then the Scottish are assumed to control Murray right over there. So you would play the card and resolve that effect. You could play something like the Assemble, which basically means you can pick up 1 cube of each color from the supply right over there and then put it down either on the same location or different location, any combination that you want. You can do a maneuver action, which basically means you can swap 1 cube from a location with another cube from a different location. They could be different colors or they could be the same color. Now, why you would want to do the same color, I don't know, but it is an option for you to do that. Outmaneuver basically means you can swap out 1 with 2. And while maneuver can be from anywhere to anywhere, outmaneuver must be in adjacent locations, as you can see by how the map is drawn out right over here. So you must swap out 1 with 2 from between 2 different locations right over there. One thing to keep in mind with these 2 cards is that if somebody's done a maneuver action, you cannot play another maneuver card to undo the exact thing that they did as the very next turn. There must be at least a gap of 1 turn in between for you to play this with the intent of undoing it. Now, you can always still play this and do a different set of movement right over there. That is always an option, but you can't use this as an undo immediately after somebody's done something of that sort. And the last card that we have over here is Negotiate. The way Negotiate will work is you can take any one of these cards, swap it out with any other card around the game board, and you can put down one of these cubes on one of the 2 cards that you have swapped. For you to swap a card, they must not be face down, so they must be one of the face up cards, and we'll talk about how they go face down and why you might want to do that a little bit later on. So you can do that, and they must also not have one of these negotiation discs on it, which of course, as we just learned, if you play a negotiation card and you swap them out, you need to put this on one of the two cards that were swapped out. So this effectively ensures that one of the cards that you swapped cannot be swapped by anybody else on a subsequent turn. Now, why are we doing these actions? Sorry about that, shaky cam. Why are we doing these actions to begin with? The reason why we want to do this is because we want certain factions to gain certain control over specific locations so that they can put down their control markers over there. And you want to drive sort of like, your influence in these codes as well. When you're playing the action, now, as you might have noticed, there are only 8 cards in the game. And whenever you play a card for its action, they basically go to the side right over there. They're never shuffled back into your hand. These are basically out of the game for the rest of the game. So you can only ever do 8 actions over the course of the game itself. So it is very tight in nature, and you have to be very selective in terms of when you want to do your action and when you want to time it. So the flow of the game basically is you can either do an action, which is do this, or you will pass. If all the players around the table have passed consecutively, then you resolve one of these different locations, starting with the lowest one that is face up right over there. So let's say, for example, in a 3-player game, I've passed, the person after me has passed, and then the next player has passed. And if this is the very first location card that is face up, which it is in this instance, we would resolve this. And the way that this will work is we will look at the location in question. We will identify this on the map. So this is, I don't want to mispronounce it. I think it's Strathclyde. Apologies if I'm getting that wrong. But this would basically be the immediate location that needs to get resolved. The way that this will happen is we'll look at this. We'll look at what's happening in Strathclyde. We'll count up the different cubes of all the factions present in that location right there and determine who won that particular location. So in this case, it looks like the Welsh have 3 cube, the English have 1, and the Scottish have none. So the Welsh would have gained control of that region. What you will do in that instance is these will go back in the supply, and then you will put out a cylinder or a control marker for the Welsh faction right over there. For the rest of the game, Welsh will always retain control of that location. There is no effect in the game that will swap that out, basically, for purposes of gameplay. And then once you've done that, you will flip this over face down, and then the game will continue with the next player. Again, either taking an action or passing. It is possible that you may pass, somebody else may take an action, it comes back to you, and you can still take an action at that point. But again, if all the players around the table pass consecutively, the next location gets resolved, and then you basically go in sequence. And that's why the sequencing of these cards are important, because obviously you're trying to look on the map, you're trying to see which is the next location that will get resolved, who may be likely to gain control of that, which cubes you want to bring onto your play area so that you can have influence with that particular faction with the intent of winning at the end of the game. The game will continue as 8 of these different locations on the map are resolved. Now, as you're doing the resolution, it is possible that there might be instances where nobody has direct control of a specific location. And that's where the French sort of like come in. So let's say, for example, the next location to get resolved is Gwynedd. And somebody would have done something over here, but let's say if this was the condition that we had at the time of the resolution for this spot, the Welsh have 2. The English have 2 control markers over there. So neither the English nor the Welsh basically control that location. So again, what basically would happen is you're going to take out these cubes, put them back in the supply over there. One of these French control markers now go on that spot. And again, for the rest of the game, the French control that location. They've added turmoil to the land of the British Isles. And that would also be one of the endgame triggers in there. So it is important to keep in mind, it's not just that one of the factions has not taken control of a location. One of the endgame conditions is if the French come in with certain set of control markers of their own as well. So either ways, the game will continue like that, going around the table with the different locations getting resolved until the very last location is resolved. And at this point, I'll just quickly call it again, because you have 8 cards to play and your actions are not really tied to a specific round. It is possible that you can play up the vast majority or all of your cards early on before these are resolved and have nothing to play when these are getting resolved. Or you could save all of them when these are getting resolved and then play them near the end of the game. Or you can use them throughout the 8 different resolutions, as it were. It is up to you to decide that in terms of what you want to accomplish, but it is perfectly possible and it's legal for that to happen. So Once we're done with that, the game end will be triggered in one of two ways. First, if all three of the French invasion markers or control markers are put out in the game area, the game ends right away. It basically means that the French have invaded the British Isles. The British Isles have not been able to crown a king of their own, and the French have taken control. If that happens, you will flip this card over to the other side, and basically the game ends right away, and you will resolve the victory condition based on the invasion. If this does not happen and the game continues and 8 of these locations end up getting resolved, you will then use this side of the card to determine who the winning player is. Let's have a look at how you determine the winning player. So if there is an invasion, basically none of the factions control the British Isles, each of the players will add up sets of these cubes that they have collected over the course of the game, and then whoever has the most set is the winner. So one set will comprise of 1 yellow, 1 blue, and 1 red cube for each of the 3 factions in the game itself. So the most sets basically wins you the game at that particular point in time. And if you are tied for it, the tiebreaker is the player who has most recently played an action card wins. So you can keep track of that. Whoever is the most recent player to play an action card in the event of a tie will be the winner in that case. Now, if there is no invasion and there is a coronation, so there is a successful king that gets crowned, you will then basically determine who the winner is by looking at which faction controls the majority of the map itself. So let's say in this particular case, if the Scottish had more control markers than anybody else, then the Scottish have been crowned the king of the British Isles, and whoever has the most cubes of the Scottish faction will be the winner. If you're tied for the most in that faction, you will move on to the second most influential faction in the game. So let's say if the second place belonged to the English, you would look at who has the most English cubes in their supply. And then, of course, if that still does not resolve it, you go on to the third one. And then if the third one, by some miracle, does not resolve it either, then the game is tied at that point. But hopefully you should have a winner at that stage. And that is basically how the winner will be determined in the event of a coronation, as it were. If there is a tie, then the player with the most followers of the second most, as we've mentioned, would be the winner. And a player who played all their cards win. So if by any chance you have any player that has not played all of their cards and they're tied, but somebody else has, then the player who has played, who first played all their cards will win. So keep that in mind. So those are the different victory conditions in there. And that's pretty much the game overview for this. So let's have a quick look at the differences for the other play accounts. This was the gameplay for a 3-player game. If you're playing a 2-player game, all the setup steps will work pretty much the same way, except before you start seeding the board, you will take out 2 cubes of each color, so 6 cubes in all, and take them out of the game. They will not be used in the game, but the other cubes will be, and then the rest of the setup works pretty much the same way. So there are 6 fewer cubes in a 2-player game. If you are playing a 4-player game, it is not every player for themselves, but rather it is a team-based affair at that point. So the way that it will work is you will be teamed up with the player sitting across from you, and then the other 2 will be part of the same team as well. So it's basically a 2v2 game at that point. You're not allowed to communicate what you're doing with your team members, so you cannot plan your strategies and coordinate in terms of who wants to control what and so on. But at the very end of the game, you will determine who has, again, control of the different factions based on the winning conditions that we spoke of pretty much the same way. And then whoever wins using the regular condition is the winner, but their team member also wins as well. And basically, the winner is the kingmaker, but their team member also wins with them as basically the kingmaker at that point. Sorry, the winner is the king and the other player is the kingmaker at that point, who would have helped support them in that cause. And of course, the other 2 players would have lost in that instance. So it's a team variant with a 4-player game. And the game also does come with a set of advanced what's called cunning cards. So basically, once you've played a few turns of the base game and you're comfortable with it, what the game recommends you do is take out these 3 support cards from the basic 8 cards that you will start off with at the start of the game. Each player will do that, and you will take this set of cunning cards, and these are unique cards over there, which are different from the ones that we had a look at earlier. You will shuffle this up and then deal 3 to each player out randomly. So a couple of things that this helps accomplish is it adds a little bit more depth to gameplay because these are now unique, and you will see different cards over different games as opposed to the same cards. And then secondly, it adds a bit of asymmetry between the different players in question, because otherwise in a standard game everybody's playing with the same set of cards, but with these you're now potentially starting off with a different hand of 8, or at least 3 cards which might be unique to you. So that's it. Those are the rules for A King is Dead. The King is Dead. Hopefully you were able to pick up the rules from that video tutorial. Give it a go. I've played this a few times and I've definitely enjoyed this quite a bit, so I personally do recommend it. And in the meanwhile, if you have any thoughts, comments, suggestions, please feel free to leave them down below. If you can subscribe to the channel, that also helps us as well. And in the meanwhile, thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.